There is an interesting question from Dale on a related note. In Europe, he says, we expect and rely on government and NGO involvement, investment in healthcare. I think maybe university facilities or professional training centers or operations for teaching and practice with production facilities that could double for excess capacity in pandemic emergency situations. Would this be viable? Zoltán, it's a good question for you because you live in that world. University facilities, professional training centers, teaching. Is there like a, I don't know, it surprises me to think that there might even be a considerable volume of potential capacity in those facilities. Is there?
There is not a lot of volume for not a lot of facilities, especially if you talk about manufacturing, you would need GMP grade facilities, right? Universities very rarely have GMP grade facilities. Actually, at Sheffield, we do have one, which is an exception, but in most cases, universities would not have GMP facilities. That being said, there are GLP labs, and some could be potentially made into GMP in some places. And one of the advantages of the RNA technology that it can be a small footprint technology as well, right? So you might not need a lot of facility footprint for making RNA-based products, right? But probably, I would say there is some capacity, still probably minimal and not sufficient for anything like a global pandemic response. Even if you combine them and you even repurpose some labs for GMP, probably still not enough at the moment, at least.
Yeah.
Have you heard of clean rooms on demand for Matt or Zoltán? They're kind of like little similar rooms, and that you can kind of move into, use, and you can put clinical there while you had to scale something up, or the movement, which I think kind of helps with the mobility and of the equipment, right? So you could kind of shift things over into these little kind of pods, I'll call them, that are just identical rooms of they have your GMP utilities, they're GMP graded for processing, and then you can kind of do that while you build out or switch back, or there's a lot of options with those and a little bit of flexibility for the surge too.
Yeah, those can be certainly interesting and helpful, but you still need to probably have the labor force there to run those.
Yeah, you run it yourself, so it definitely gets higher. It's a kind of a mix, in a site.
Yeah. I want to just jump quickly to polling question number 2. I got a couple more polling questions to get through. So polling question number 2, Miles, if you can throw that up. What equipment or technologies do you currently use for efficient manufacturing processes end to end? Some of the things we talked about: single-use systems, configurable, movable process trains. Not applicable. We currently outsource our manufacturing. Complete modular building units, partial modular spaces such as clean rooms or other, aseptic fill finish processing robotics equipment, some level of automation or other. So if you take a minute to fill that out, the questions related to a few of the things that we've been talking about. And while our audience is responding to that poll question, Kayla, I wanted to ask you about something you just mentioned, this idea of like portable kind of clean room infrastructure. And anytime you introduce, something new in a manufacturing environment, the FDA takes notice, right? Like anytime you say, well, we're going to reconfigure this, we're going to modularize that, we're going to make this mobile, we're going to distribute, the technology that we're deploying, the FDA is going to need to check that out, and there are going to be regulatory implications. So tell me your perspective, Kayla, on what regulatory challenges sort of stand in the way or pose challenges to biopharmas who are looking to move towards a more surge-ready manufacturing environment.
I think from regulatory standing, I would say the main is kind of the paper-based or going kind of electronic helped a lot of things during the pandemic, for sure. And then, being able to keep track of equipment, right? So having like an electronic database that can help kind of streamline equipment and where it's used, since you're going to be moving them around. I think that's a big regulatory challenge and stuff like that you had to prove. But then being single use, you're able to kind of prove no cross-contamination and things like that. So having kind of certain IDs with them and being able to track them where they land and where they go is definitely a big part of it, and was definitely a challenge that I think regulatory seen as part of this mobilization that comes from it. Where was it used? How was it changed over from one process to another, to a different site even, right?
Yeah.
And tracking that as a whole, which I think, inventory management and different databases have grown a lot over the years due to that as well. And then obviously regulatory being able to do emergency authorization use is what made things so rapid at that aspect, which then goes back to government, right? What do you need to be able to rapidly increase and what goes into that?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm interested, Zoltán, on your take, like, your experience with you're closer, at least geographically, to EMA, although I'm sure you're intimately familiar with the FDA's response as well. But during COVID, the regulatory authorities were incredibly amenable and ready to move rapidly. Do we feel as though there's been sustainable, I guess, change and responsiveness on the part of regulators to enable industry to respond the way that we did during COVID? Like, is that sort of like, well, that was yesterday. The next pandemic, we're going to be doing some pretty heavy lifting to appease regulators again.
Yeah, I think they did tremendous jobs, both the FDA and the EMA, right? And it was a lot of effort for them, and it was probably not sustainable to do that on a normal basis from their point of view, right? I think what's interesting is that now we have these technologies that are platform technologies, right? And it might be a different way of regulating these on a platform basis, right? So you could have some kind of a pre-qualification of the platform, so that you don't have to always start from zero and for every product do the whole process, validation, everything else, right? So you would have qualifications, you would have some of that already pre-done, because basically the process doesn't change, right? If you have a platform, right? So with that approach, I think the regulatory workload could decrease as well, because they would not have to do it every time for every product when not much change in the process, basically, right? Yeah. And I know that SAPI is working on this as well, right, as part of their 100-day mission. And there's lots of talk about this platform approach. But yeah, so that's something that I could see that potentially in the future would make things a bit easier, right, in terms of the regulatory approach. But there are other challenges. For example, we are developing these continuous processes, which rely on real-time monitoring and ideally even real-time release, which is another regulatory issue, right? We are using all sorts of computer models to kind of like assay quality, basically, of the product, right? And that those have to be approved by regulators as well. All of these controllers that we have, the models that we're building, they have to be approved, right? So it's quite a lot of challenges there in terms of regulatory challenges, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, your computer validation at that point increases a lot, which definitely, but once that is validated, like you said, then you can streamline it through once it's approved, but it's definitely that initial increase.
Yeah. Miles, let's take a look at those poll questions, if you don't mind. See what the responses look like. So single-use systems and partial modular spaces, such as clean rooms or other. Some level of automation look like the leaders. Any surprises there to either of you, Kayla or Zoltán?
No, kind of what I expected.